Are we being recorded now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, good morning. This is October. I keep still wanting to say September. This is October 12th, 2022. It is 9:02. And this morning, preceding our council time agenda, we're going to have a work session on the capital improvement plan with Parks Planning and Development and Parks and Lands Division involved in the presentation. So let's get underway. Who is going to start? I don't know if it's Rocky or David or whom.
Sorry, I said mute. So I thought that meant it was on. Sorry, technology. For the record, Rocky Houston, Parks and Lands Division Manager. With me as well is David Stipe, our Planning and Development Program Manager.
Get a little closer to the microphone, please. I'm so sorry. I just am having a terrible time hearing.
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect.
Sorry. That's why I was trying to stay away there. All right. So in front of you is the 2023 fiscal year update. Council should have received our draft capital plan. David and I are going to go over this briefly to answer any questions, provide you an update of what we've been working on here in the last few months. Next slide, please. So to review our public process, we started prior to September, of course, but on September 20th, we had a public meeting at our Luke Jensen room. We had a public comment period on the draft plan from August 26th through September 26th. Based off of that feedback, we updated the draft plan that's in front of it and presented to you. Last night, we had a presentation to the Parks Advisory Board. We had provided them an initial agenda meeting, I believe back in August as well, but we presented the plan in front of them to make sure they're aware of our capital plan and answer any questions they had. We're here in front of you today to do the work session, and then we plan to be here next week for the hearing to adopt the capital plan prior to our budgeting process. Just for a note is we're doing a lot of catch up with COVID and new staff. And so if next year, we will have this meeting 30 to 60 days earlier in the calendar year. So we're trying to get that caught up to where there's plenty of time, but there's a schedule we have to make sure we meet. Next slide, please. So just as a review, back in April, we were here presenting our pros plan and adopting our capital plan, our capital facilities plan, and that 20-year projection for capital costs pursuant to RCW 36.70A, or the Growth Management Act. From there, we've updated that based off of our activities this year and our scheduling for other park projects that are ahead of schedule, and some are behind schedule, the nature of capital delivery. And so we're, back then, we had indicated that we are moving into an annual process, much like the TIP. And so we're coming here every year to update our capital plan and that 6-year projection to make sure that we're responsive to current needs and reactive to our resources. So we want to make sure that we're looking at this more frequently and be more realistic. Next slide. I just want to cover a few of the notable changes. The number's grown for the fiscal year 23 significantly, and that's due to a couple key projects. So we have a delay in the Harmony Sports Complex project, and we'll be coming back to council for some discussion on getting some policy direction on where we want to go with that. That was slated to start construction this year, and a few years prior to that. I think we started back in 2017 or 2018, and have had some delivery issues in regards to lots of other city plans and other things. So that 3.35 was programmed for this calendar year to be delivered. That's being moved forward to next year. In addition, the Curtin Creek Community Park, which was one of the 35 parks we identified we were going to construct back in 2005 as part of the Greater Clark Park District bond or levy to create the park district, is ahead of schedule. And so we are at 60% design, and it appears that we'll be able to go to, could be going out to bid for the 23 construction cycle. And so that's a $6.5 million. In addition, we've, due to the wetland project and the other efforts that we have at Heritage Farm, is we're looking to construct an interpretive trail and features on the northeast corner to enhance the access and engagement with that wetland and the farm for the public. And it's consistent with our master plan and our sort of design there. So we've added that in. So that is a shift of about $10.8 million into that from those elements. Just wanted to cover those things because the number did change significantly for what we presented as our forecast back in April for fiscal year 23 versus what we're moving forward to today. And to look at this in a different way is next slide. And is this where I'm switching to you, sir?
For the record, my name is David Stipe. I'm the Planning and Development Manager for Clark County Parks and Lands. We received some really good feedback from the Parks Advisory Board yesterday, so Rocky and I are going to probably tag team here for just a couple of minutes. So this slide represents sort of our 23 to 28 CIP at a glance by the major categories that are identified in the capital improvement plan. The first column of numbers, the left column, is what we projected for fiscal year 23 in the plan that was adopted in April of this year. And the second set of numbers is our revised 23 capital improvement plan budget. And it's worth noting this previous slide where we showed the $10,000 in additional capital expenses makes up a fair amount of that growth in the 23 number from April to now. The other growth in the 23 capital improvement plan budget revolves around adding an escalation of 10% year over year in our preventative maintenance and our major maintenance dollars to count for inflation if it continues, but to also recognize that we do have additional parks coming online, and so our preventative maintenance needs and our major maintenance needs are going to continue to grow. It also reflects a growth in the acquisition numbers from the 22 to 27 plan to the 23 to 28 plan, because we've added dollar figures into our park and rec acquisition numbers and specified the legacy land numbers while also earmarking some legacy land dollars so we can be more responsive to opportunities that might arise that we aren't foreseeing. It also gives us the flexibility to go out and start to look at property that would help us over the long term address the level of service needs that were identified in the current PROS plan. So where does that money come from? This is where Rocky and I are going to back and forth a little bit. So we do have several different buckets of money that these funds come from.
So this slide is representative of our funding sources over the 6-year period, and breaking it down by REIT 2, our MPD, which is mainly operation and maintenance and preventive maintenance. REIT 2 is major maintenance and development projects. The PIF, or Park Improvement Fund, is development and acquisition of new facilities, parks. General Fund, which is primarily preventative and some major maintenance based off of our regional parks and other parks that aren't within the MPD boundary. Our legacy lands, which is of course our acquisition arm for natural areas, and then other. And other is primarily grants, foundations, other donations, et cetera, that we may receive to help deliver the program. So all these funding sources are broken down by type of project, as well as that funding source for that total $74 million.
If you can actually go back a slide, I'd like to cover one other thing in that previous slide. Sorry for the omission. I wanted to sort of highlight the difference between the 2022 to 2027 capital improvement plan total of $52 million versus the 23 to 28 capital improvement plan. That's the significant difference that Rocky was mentioning previously, in addition to the 23 growth in the 23 capital budget. That difference reflects our change in projecting a growth in preventative maintenance and major maintenance, as opposed to leaving it static year over year. So in the 22 to 27 CIP, we had a consistent number year over year for those two categories, and didn't recognize any growth to cover inflation and system growth. It also reflects a new plan that we're working on that we'll talk about in a few minutes to identify new park developments on the 17 undeveloped properties that we currently have in response to the level of service needs that were identified in the current PROS plan. So I just wanted to sort of touch base on that. So if you can jump forward 2 slides, that would be great. So we have a lot of different projects in the capital improvement plan on those maintenance needs, the preventative maintenance and the major maintenance. As you likely know, we have 63 developed parks throughout the system, and some of them are getting on to being, 20, 30, 40 years old in some cases. Hazel Dell's a perfect example of quite an old park. And so we have more projects than we have staff and funding to address when it comes to major maintenance. And so we evaluate those projects based on these criteria, and in the past it's been somewhat informal. We're working to formalize that process with an updated inventory of our park system that we're currently working on with our GIS department, which will help inform Cartograph, which is a new maintenance software program that's being rolled out. The criteria are basically some pretty obvious ones, but the condition of the item, if it's broken and it needs to be replaced, we replace it. Park user impacts, is it something that a lot of folks visit on a daily basis? The spray ground at Kleinline is a perfect example that if it needs to be repaired, it has a really big park user impact because a lot of people use it in the summer. Return on investment, is that item that needs to be repaired costing us in weekly, monthly maintenance, and fixing it would cut down on our sort of day-to-day, week-to-week maintenance costs and leverage? Are there partners that may be associated with replacing an item? The spray grounds, to sort of continue with that example, is a good example. If we were to do some major improvements to the spray ground, can we apply for grant funding, those sorts of things. Operational impact. If we're not repairing or replacing items that cause us to have a high level of daily, monthly maintenance, is it keeping us from doing other things? So do we need to replace that item so we can handle other maintenance issues? And then a stewardship impact. Does the item that we're considering repairing or replacing, is it having a negative environmental impact to a habitat area? So those are the criteria for the maintenance needs.
I would just like to add that in the park, user impact is also a social justice or DEI component in regards to, again, trying to ensure that our parks and the work that we're doing is consistent with where we need to go to meet those criterion as well.
Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we have sort of two maintenance categories. We have the preventative maintenance category and the major maintenance category. And this slide represents the definition of our major maintenance categories and then a snapshot of what you would see in the CIP plan. So preventative maintenance is bench or picnic table replacement, seal coating a parking lot as opposed to replacing pavement, painting, siding repair, those sorts of things. Usually a smaller size project, something that we wouldn't normally capitalize. It's just a maintenance project that's larger than a daily maintenance item, but smaller than a replacement of an item. So next slide, please. And then those major maintenance items would be things like replacing a roof or replacing a restroom or doing a major parking lot or trail resurfacing where we would actually remove pavement and put a new lift of pavement on, or like a sports turf replacement. So we have artificial turf. A good example is Luke Jensen's artificial turf is 10 or 12 years old. That needs to be replaced every 12 to 16 years. It's something that we're looking at for a future CIP. And then we have a category for emergent projects, those things that we didn't see coming that need to be addressed. An example of that might not be the best example would be the Klein Line shelter, because when it was hit by a tree several years ago, if we had an emergent project fund, we would have been able to go out there and take that shelter down much quicker than we currently have. Thank goodness it's not out there anymore, and we're looking to replace that shelter in 23. So that's what the Emergent Repair Project Fund is for. Next slide.
So this slide is just what's in the report, a list of those projects that are major maintenance. And as you see, we've got it categorized by each year. I will note that the white bar there that it's cut off here, and I apologize, that's the total project budget. So again, that's an effort where we're working to continue to update and show our Parks Advisory Board, council, and staff what our total project cost is. This will be updated when we come back next week. We're looking at prior expenditures and making sure that we have a column for that and that it's all those numbers are accurate to ensure that we're transparent in regards to our project and total project cost to everyone.
It's not something we had in the 22 to 27 CIP.
Next slide, please.
This, just some real quick definitions on development projects. Development projects are obviously new park projects, but it could also be a project that addresses an element in an existing park master plan that isn't currently constructed. An example of that, which is in this CIP budget, is the ball fields at Pacific Park. That's a commitment that was made back in 2005 when the Metropolitan Park District was formed, was the complete construction of Pacific Park. And then playground replacements, shelter and restroom replacements may end up being capital items or additions. Land acquisition is both for legacy lands, which is open space conservation or ag conservation, and then acquisitions for new park development, as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking to acquire property to address the level of service goals and issues in the PROS plan. And then we've added an equipment and vehicle category to the capital improvement plan, and it's worth noting that this isn't the only vehicle and equipment line item that we have. This is specifically identified toward new equipment as opposed to replacements of vehicles through the fleet program. So there is a line item for that at this point.
Next slide, please. So just wanted to make a quick note is that we have 17 properties we've acquired that are undeveloped within the Greater Clark Park District, and we're going through a process with staff and the Parks Advisory Board to prioritize that, utilizing our revised rubric or scoring criteria that came out of the PROS plan. And so we had that 35 properties identified, and we were working through that since 2005. And now we want to do is take a snapshot and look at the prioritization of developing those additional properties in the future, and then continue to lay that out on a 10 to 15-year program to develop those. And so this is just a quick highlight of those scoring criteria, which is consistent with what you saw before, except for we're looking at that level of service element as well as another component of sort of that impact to users. Next slide.
So on the prioritization process, we did in this last round of evaluations add a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in anticipation of having a DEI plan in the future. We used the Census Department data for health, age, and income and disability to evaluate the undeveloped properties to make sure that we're spending the available development dollars in an equitable manner. And it did make a minor shuffle to the prioritization list that was previously being utilized to plan future development. That's something that we'll get into a little bit further when we review that with the Parks Advisory Board and the council ultimately. So just wanted to highlight that addition to our evaluation criteria.
And just to put that into real world, so we've updated our park rules sign to where it has more pictures or infographics, I guess is the right word, or icons. And it's displayed in English, Russian, and Spanish. So again, we're trying to do all these small things to continue to make sure our parks are reflective of the community and that a majority of the users are aware of our rules and feel welcome in our facilities. Next.
So just real quickly on that slide, I'm sorry, before you change it, this just represents the capital development plan. It highlights those previously outlined changes in that 2023 capital list. So the Harmony Sports Park being carried forward to 23, and then the Curtin Creek Community Park promotion from 24 to 23, and then obviously the Heritage Farm improvements. It does also take a step back, at least this version takes a step back from identifying those new neighborhood and new community park developments. By the time we come back to you next week, we will have identified those parks for that discussion. And then planning for new neighborhood and new community park master plans moving forward, which we didn't have in our 2022 to 2027 plan.
In this under acquisition, sorry that sounds very loud. I want to note also is that there's a transition in our legacy land programs. Historically, we went every few years and we'd apply for a process to identify key specific properties to acquire. We're working through that prior committing those lists. At the same time, we've identified there's more pressures on property and the timelines are different and quicker. And so we're trying to have our legacy lands acquisition program consistent with our parks or PIF district acquisition plans, so identifying a sub area or location that we're trying to acquire property in. And as those properties come forward, as we're more we're able to react quicker and start that process and bring it forth to the council to get approval to move on a potential acquisition. But this allows us to slow the time. We got a lot of complaints or feedback, that's the right word, feedback that the process of 2 or 3 years to get through our purchasing process isn't consistent with what sellers want. They want to have a much quicker transaction. So again, we're trying to identify mechanisms to be responsive to those opportunities that do arise on real property transactions. Next slide.
This slide just represents the 23 to 28 budget totals sort of in by category. And in this graphic, for clarification, we did break out the land acquisition dollars for conservation versus park development. So since they serve a different purpose and the money comes from different locations, and so the new 6-year 23 to 28 CIP is just under $75 million at this point. So that's again an increase from the 22 to 27 from 50 to 75, but it's worth noting that the 6-year CIP under the old PROS plan was somewhere around $150 million, for context.
In leaving comments from staff here, I just want to say is that the intent when the Greater Clark Park District was developed is that we'd be developing properties until we didn't have capacity to manage them. And so that initial intent is something we're very focused on today, and we're doing our maintenance management plan, looking at each property and what those hours are to complete that level of service for it, and then looking at where that sits given our current resources. And so that's going to be a continued tool for us to look at future properties and identify before they're built what that maintenance level is going to be, where our resources are from a staffing, funding in regards to that, and continue to have that bigger discussion in regards to, is this capital plan reflective of our capacity staffing-wise to maintain them if they are developed? In addition, part of our PIF funds, of course, have a shelf life, and so that's another thing that we're looking at in regards to as we're looking at projects is within each PIF district is what those funds that came in and making sure that we're being prudent and useful of those funds strategically as well as we align with projects. And with that, next slide. We welcome any comments or questions you may have to help make this a better document.
Would you please begin by highlighting some of the feedback that you got from the Parks Advisory Board, and particularly that which you feel may lead to some changes?
Oh, it was mostly related to presentation. There weren't any substantive changes from the Parks Advisory Board. They were interested in additional information about why the 22 to 27 budget was $50 million, and then the 23 to 28 budget was $75 million. So we provided some additional clarification with regards to that.
I see. Would you also focus on the 17 undeveloped sites? Looks like you have quite a bit set aside in capital funds for developing those sites. Could you go into that a little bit more? In fact, it looked like I was trying to do the math without a calculator and quickly seeing the numbers. It looked like maybe even as high as 26 million, but I'm not sure about that.
So, go ahead.
David and I will both try to answer that, of course. So those 17 parcels, community parks are costing now somewhere between $7 to $10 million to develop, and a neighborhood park is costing us somewhere between $1.5 million and $3 million, and that's based off of what features are developed at that park. So we are looking at that development from two levels. So as we move forward, our staffing capacity to deliver, we want to make sure that we're not creating a choke point by having 4 or 5 projects we're trying to get delivered at one time and don't have the staffing to be able to do that. And we're also looking at phasing. So sometimes having an asset partially built and open to the public to meet some of that recreational nature, but not fully built out to the master plan, has a higher impact to that area. And so that's another thing we're looking at is building to a budget versus building to a full, complete build-out. So a park's different than like a road. So you have to get from point A to point B, and if there's a bridge you need in to do it, you have to kind of build it. With a park, we can build elements and then add elements later when other resources come apart. And so that's part of the discussion I think we're trying to have internally with staff and with the Parks Advisory Board is sort of that that philosophy in regards to, do we want to partially build out some parks, or do we want to build a complete park? And historically, I think we've sort of built the whole park and walked away. Some examples where we haven't done that is Pacific Park, where there was some elements, ball fields, a air hockey fields, an expansion of skate park that weren't developed, and those were left off. The park still functions great and is meeting a significant amount of the intended users. And so that, I think that's it. In regards to our funding, I believe we have about $40 million in our PIF fund through 2031 available to do that. And then, of course, with the REAP funding, I want to say there's 24 to 26 million that's available today, but that's not just for park usage, that's for variety. So those are the two funding sources that we are utilizing and trying to budget those out, at least at a very high level, cost level of those parks to do that. In addition, we're trying to look at our project delivery model, again, to squeeze the pennies and make some of that stuff as efficient as possible, especially given the rise in costs for the projects themselves. So
I think it's, Chair Bowerman, I think it's worth noting that of that proposed 23 to 28 capital number of 30 million, just almost 31 million, you're right, about 26, 28 million is for actual new development. And that's 1, 2, 3, 5 new parks, 6 new parks of the 17. And there will be in the areas of highest need. Obviously, we've already identified Curtin Creek Park because we're about 60% complete on design drawings there. So, and this is the current thinking for the next 6 years is that we can deliver these parks and maintain them. We obviously wouldn't be able to develop 17 parks in 6 years, and so we'll be able to revisit the remaining sites. And also, since we're going to an annual capital improvement plan process where we're going to be updating this annually, we'll perfect the 24 numbers and we'll project the 29 numbers and come back to you for a similar conversation. And our sort of development goals and maintenance goals will change over time depending on demand and the economy. Hopefully the bidding environment is better so we can make our capital dollars go a little bit further, but right now we're taking it in the chin out there when it comes to park development of any sort. So.
Other questions?
Madam Chair, I have
Yes.
some questions and comments.
Go ahead, please.
So thank you. I'm going to preface this first by focusing on the county manager. I've always been in awe at the depth and breadth of management challenges throughout the county. And, most of that is unheralded in the public. They don't know all the good work that's going on every day across the county in so many areas, and now some of that burden at least is on the deputy. So I'm just so amazed at all of the challenges that are being met pragmatically and efficiently with tax dollars and whatever revenue streams are available. Those comments go likewise to the Parks Department. You guys are great.
Thank you.
And you're doing so much great work. And I appreciate your responsiveness and the participation you had getting Molten Falls improvements done, and Cedars, and at least the attempt to get access to Green Mountain. That was about as fast as I've seen the county work on anything, and unfortunately, we couldn't compete with the private sector and grabbing that piece of land there so we could have access. But kind of getting to the point that Rocky made, and a couple I want to make, where is our capacity limit in developing and maintaining? And, we do get complaints from time to time on about every single subject that's possibly imaginable in the county. And so some that come to mind to me, this briefing was a great overview, and it shows the depth and breadth of what you're doing, I think, for the public's visibility, if any single person is actually watching and listening. Usually just the Parks Commission folks are actually lurking and hearing. But, especially during the pandemic, Louisville, oh my gosh, we had all these complaints about long lines, can't get in the park. I heard that from the Public Works Director at the time that, okay, we're going to put in another lane, we'll have more access into the park. We heard about Lacamas, everybody's parking in the fire lane, it's backing up onto 500. I think Frenchman's Bar had some of the same issues. Molten Falls, we've got a traffic directing device for safety reasons, slashing people's tires because they didn't read the signs and pulled the wrong way into the parking lot. So there's a myriad of challenges out there that gets into the detail of some of these capital improvements / maintenance that sometimes I would like to get visibility of that, especially those constituent complaints that I've passed on to the manager in parks. I'd like to know where they resolved. Heritage is Harmony, we focused on that for so long. We worked with the city. We were trying to get access at that one choke point and getting that roadway going through. In the summertime, that parking lot is a dust bowl that would rival third world. I mean, it reminded me of the desert of Afghanistan at times with the dust that came in when they had a soccer tournament there, and the long line trying to get in and out of the parking lot. Imagine some kind of emergency there. And all of that seems pretty unchanged. And you just mentioned that some of it was stalled, and I hadn't heard a bit about that. Heritage Farm, I've been advocating for more public access there. Will this trail access the incubator farm program? Where will it go? How does it intersect with the work that's being done with the wetland? And by the way, I thought that was in the future. Then I heard it was nearly done, and I was just there a week ago and met with some folks at Heritage and saw that it really hadn't progressed at all. So, these are all current operations, current maintenance challenges, and I'd really like to get a detailed feel for that as to where we're at on solving those known problems. And then I throw in there, because we just had the meeting yesterday, the county is generally looking for a location where we can partner with the city of Vancouver on an RV park or safe park kind of a facility as we look forward to C-Trend closing their transfer site. Have you been participating in those discussions? I heard 17 undeveloped properties, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking, well, maybe one of those is in a good location. Then you mentioned doing some partial improvements, which could be consistent, whether it's grading or paving. So the question there is, have you been talking about any of your undeveloped properties in this search by the county for locations to address some of our homeless issues? So that was a lot out there, and I think probably maybe for me, a one-on-one would be better in the future to get into some of the detail of what you provided a summary of.
Yeah, we'll work with the county manager and deputy county manager to schedule that frequency and get into that detail. And in regards to the homeless property, look, we were engaging with Kathleen and Amber on assessing our property and determining what the desired need was versus what our property. So at that time, it appeared that we didn't have the level of development of the site to manage the use, and so we provided the feedback of some of those properties and what the lift would be to get them to a spot. And none are consistent with that. I think that's off 18th and 136th, 38th site, which is heavily developed and able to hold that use better than a lot of our undeveloped natural areas, essentially these properties are. But we were engaged in that, just to note that one element.
Just to add to Rocky's comments in response to your questions. Rocky and I have been talking about producing sort of an annual report, and we would be happy to come and present a document that shows what we accomplished, what we didn't, why we didn't get it accomplished. I think that the last time we were in front of you, we were talking about Heritage Farm, and if we need to come and talk to you 3-4 times as much as we currently do, we're willing to do that. We do cover a lot of ground. We do have a lot of challenges. We've had staff turnover, but an annual report seems to make sense for us. And whether we present it to you or whether you just receive it and review it to the extent that you want to, helps provide you with some of that information that you're left lacking when you look at something like this, some very basic spreadsheet that, by the way, has 47 columns to it. You're not seeing all the columns because we're identifying where the money's coming from. So we do have the capacity financially to do the work over the next 6 years projected in this draft CIP. We feel we have the staff to deal with the delivery and the maintenance of it, given some of the other budgetary requests that we're making. But we're happy to provide the level of detail that you want.
Super. Thanks for everything and everything you've been doing.
Our pleasure.
Madam Chair?
Are there other questions from council?
Yes, ma'am.
Go right ahead, Councilor Rylander.
Perhaps my voice is too deep. Anyway, just a couple of items. Number one, you mentioned staffing, and I'm in turnover and so forth. I'm just kind of curious as to, are you fully staffed? Are you nearly fully staffed? Or is the staffing causing you significant issues on deliverables? That's only current, but looking sort of down the road for the balance of your plan, are you going to need additional headcount, or are you going to be able to make do with what's allocated? That's the first, and then I'll have a second item.
So the first question, thank you, Councilor Rylander. So I think we have 3 open seats on our team within the Parks and Lands Division now. I think we were at 9 a year ago, so we've made steadily progress there. But there's always a lag in bringing people up to speed. And I think that's part of what we're doing. If you look at just the 2 of us here, we've got a combined county tenure of about 18 months. And so I've got a lot of staff that we're just bringing them up to speed. And so for operationally, we've, per the PROS plan, we looked at some research in regards to where we compare to other park districts that are like us around the nation, and looking at asset acres, dollars spent per acre, FTE per acre, those sort of data. So we have some of that preliminary data. The MMP, our maintenance management plan that we're looking at, we've been working on trying to get that data up. That's another tool to help us identify operationally where we're at. In regards to capital project delivery, we've improved from a year ago in that we now have David as an additional staff person to help us deliver and manage that. But we still utilize the engineering and construction team for a lot of the project management, construction management, design, management of those contracts. I believe they're still down a few people. So that's outside of our little realm, but that is another influencer that I know they've been working hard on from a management and project delivery, project management, and it isn't for a lack of effort of trying to get the message out there and get people hired. I know they've hired a couple people, but I think they're still down 3 or 4, maybe more project managers. In looking at that issue, as well as our change request proposals for next year, was to add some more planning staff and project staff to do with some of our smaller projects and maybe a couple of our larger ones, again, to help public works project delivery overall for all the type of projects, so we can lean into some of the bit ourselves, and again, and to try to continue to meet this this capital plan. And so it's just that the longer we can have people tenured, usually the more efficient they are, and we're continuing to see those small strides every day as my team learns the Clark County way of doing business, the rules and regulations we have just in regards to project delivery, and how that all fits into our timeline, so that we're projecting, the reality of how long it takes to do a project versus what I feel it should take, and that's always a process.
Sorry, one other, and so you led me into my next one. Perfect. And that is, you mentioned you're gathering data, comparison to other counties, whether it's in the state or across the nation, et cetera, to see how you compare to what they're doing. And based on some of the information that I've seen recently, over the trend report over the last 9 years, which I'll plug, I wrote an article in the Reflector, which was published about 3 weeks ago, looking at the county. There's a number of examples where the county is actually being extremely efficient. And so where I'm going with this is, and I've said this to others, and I want to repeat it, I think that where your performance clearly stands out and you can show that you're delivering well at or above other comparators, I think it's useful for you to find a way to make sure the public is aware of that, so that when you come forward with your request for funding or personnel, et cetera, that they can see that the value is there. And I think when people see that, then they're much more open to saying, sure, we're okay with the allocation of these resources, or perhaps in some cases actually spending more money out of their pocket because they really see the value. So I guess tooting your own horn as appropriate and reasonable is something that I think not only you should do, but other areas of the county should do in a judicious manner, not necessarily totally self-serving, but to point out the value that you're bringing.
I think that's a great point. And I think, my predecessor started it, and I'm continuing to try to have that data set to where we can tell our story better of where we are, where our needs are, and where our deficiencies are, and I know that cardiograph is it's software, we always say software is going to solve the world's problems, but it is a tool that I've seen other communities utilize, where there's sort of like a scorecard or an ongoing sheet that the citizens can look at online that shows number of potholes filled, number of acres mowed, whatever those things that you're looking at, number of man hours out there. Again, it's just that splash of some of those key things that the public is interested in, and showing that the dollars are at work. And that is always something in the back of my mind, is that we have patrons, so people who pay in to allow us to have this opportunity to provide parks, and that relationship's different, and we need to respect that. And I think that's something that we continue to try to think about with any concern that's raised, any idea that it is raised. All those things are things that I always take that step back and think of. I have a patron here, someone who is participating financially and utilizing it, and the ripples of parks, I get on a little soapbox, have so many impacts to the community and the livability and the reason why people come and stay here, whether it's a business and or just citizens living, residents. So, I think I feel those other elements that we do, and it may just feel like we're falling behind on mowing this park or that park, or out to Pacific Park for the 3rd time this week, removing vandalism. But again, that those all have those other impacts, and You know, it's kind of like that, when I started in the workforce, it was like I needed to know the big picture so that I could deal with the pressures and the frustration of the day-to-day grind. And that's what I continue to try to look at and convey to my staff is, you know, we're invisible. If we do our job right, no one knows we were there because it's exactly the way they wanted it. The bathroom was clean. They got to play their game. They got to have a picnic. They got to have a little off-leash dog area. But if the grass is too long, there's weeds, the bathroom's blowing up, whatever those issues, that's usually when we get told, hey. And so, you know, it's all these little things, hopefully, that add to it. And I've talked too much, and thank you for your time.
That's right. I see the county as a service business. And as a service business, we're delivering. We have certain demands. They have to get permits to do this and that and so forth. But in reality, to me, it's a service business. And the way to deal with the customers is to understand what they need, do our very best to deliver, and provide information. And I'm of the opinion, and on my soapbox, that the more information people have, the better decisions that they make. And so if we have to err, let's err on the side of making sure that we're transparent, we've got the data and information out, that we're responsive, and we do that with a smile, which I know can be challenging depending on the circumstance at times. But again, part of that service model, if you embrace that, then we have to make sure that we're doing the right things and working closely with the people and public and keeping them informed. Now I'm off my soapbox.
I'd just jump in one quick second. We're working more closely with our public information office to get information about what we're doing out there. I think there's 3 sort of good recent examples. One of them is the work that's going on out at Cozy Camp. Cindy's been out there with our drone taking some aerial photos that are sort of time-lapse stills. I've been sending them pictures of the pavement that's been going on out at Cozy Camp, and then the playground project at Philida that was stalled and has gotten started again. And then also something as simple as the entry improvements, the little easy entry improvement that we made out at Louisville. We sent them the information and worked on collecting input on what we were planning on doing, and then sharing the photographs of the final product, and using our social media platform to appropriately toot our horn, because we do a good job, I feel, and we always strive to improve to collect information and listen, but we don't really relate that action items associated with that public feedback.
Other comments from council?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Olson.
I just have a couple brief. I'm just going to reiterate what Councilors Rylander and Medvigi stated as well, and just give my thanks to the Parks Department. It's been, this Parks situation over the last 10 years has been significantly changed, and your department has picked up the ball and run with it. So thank you. And I know you have a young staff, and there'll be a lot of looking forward to seeing how that goes into the future. Just piggybacking on information and you know, putting our best foot forward. I don't know that I heard this morning, but make sure that you include all the volunteer hours that go into our parks. I think at one point, I heard it was like 18,000 volunteer hours in a year. So I think that's incredibly important as well, because that's real money. And it's our community investing, not just with their dollars, but with their sweat and their labor to make our parks great and to support our community. So just wanted to throw that in and make sure that's included in the equation.
Thank you. And I know our volunteer coordinator is collecting those hours, and you're right, I don't think we've been publishing that outward in the last year or two, and we need to do that. Thanks for reminding us.
Excellent point. I would just add one quick thing, and that is that with the 17 undeveloped sites and never enough money to do, or interest to do all 17 at once, for goodness sakes, what is the suggested order and prioritization for going about that process? I think it would be important for the county to have, maybe it's top 3 or 5 priorities known for development, particularly when development of some of that property for accommodating homelessness enters into the picture. Having agreement and understanding on that priority, I think, would be important for acceptance. And I mean acceptance by the larger public, and that includes employees as well as the greater public out there that cares very much about our parks and who is served. And I'm not suggesting that something terribly elaborate be developed, but something that is relatively simple and to the point, so that as we tackle those 17, we know that we are doing it in a way that makes sense to people that they would like to see. Other thoughts from council? Okay, I thank you all very much, and echo the comments that have been made by each counselor, that your work is really amazing given all of the variables that come into play for development of parks and maintenance of parks in Clark County right now. Thank you for your great work and for the capital improvement plan as well. That concludes this work session.